the Hi everyone, sorry for that. My name is Lena Teitelbaum. I am the MCR president. I am a rising senior at Northwood High School and will be moderating this tonight.
I'm Vicki Kidder. I'm the co-director of the Education Policy Department of the MCR. I attend Magruder High School and I will be the other moderator for tonight.
And MCR is known as the Montgomery County Regional Student Government Association, otherwise known as MCR-SGA or MCR for short. And we are Montgomery County's countywide student leadership organization. We just want to say that MCR is a nonpartisan entity that seeks to represent the views and ideas of all MCPS high school students. We are going to hand this over to Mr. Nick Asante to give his introduction.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nick Asante. I'm your 43rd student member of the board, and I'm a rising senior at Richard Montgomery High School. I just want to thank all of you who are watching tonight. This is a very important program, and I want to thank all of the students who have worked to organize this, as well as all of the panelists who are currently with us tonight. Prior to ending his term, my predecessor, Nate Tinbite, at the June 11th meeting, passed along with the rest of the board a resolution that would look into the SRO program within our school district. And I know a lot of students have a lot of questions about the role that SROs play at our schools and what the role of the SRO will look like in the future. And so tonight, as I'm listening to your questions and listening to the answers from our panelists, I'll be taking notes and bringing them with me as the board continues to investigate into the SRO program.
Thank you, Nick. So first off, we're going to be given a brief overview of the history and role of school resource officers in MCPS by some members of the Education Policy Department, including Elon Atlaw, who's a junior at Northwood, Nandini J, a junior at Clarksburg, Nick Spring, a junior at Damascus, and Iman Ilyas, a junior at Whitman.
Hello, this is Elon. So what are SROs? School resource officers are sworn in law enforcement, trained in emergency preparedness, community policing concepts, crisis management, and problem solving. They are assigned to work as a liaison to MCPS. As listed, their emergency preparedness duties are assisting with emergency plans and procedures. This includes participating in shelter-in-place, lockdowns, and evacuation drills. School resource officers also act as a resource for safety awareness education and a point of contact for law enforcement programs that include bullying, drug and alcohol prevention, gang awareness, and many more. School resource officers coordinate walkthroughs, which are visits done with responding officers in the area to review the emergency plan. Their crisis management duties are assisting staff in creating a safer school environment by working with MCPS officials. As problem solvers, SROs meet regularly with students and staff to discuss community issues. SROs are informed with gang threats and support investigations. However, SROs are explicitly prohibited from enforcing MCPS policies, rules, regulations, and procedures.
Hi, I'm Nandini J, and today I'm going to be telling you guys about which schools have SROs. According to the Maryland Safe to Learn Act, all schools in MD are required to have SROs. 23 out of 26 MCPS high schools employ at least one SRO, and there are currently 220 SROs and security professionals in total. High schools can have more than one SRO since it usually depends on the population. SROs work directly with an assigned high school, but they also work collaboratively with feeder schools as needed. So if another high school needs help due to security, SROs can work together to solve the problem. Furthermore,
Hi, my name is Nick Spring. So all the way back in 2002, the SRO program was first created in MCPS due to an increased demand in school safety following the Columbine High School shooting. Over the 2000s, funding for the SRO program decreased, but following the Sandy Hook High School shooting back in 2012, the funding increased again.
Hi, my name is Iman Elias. And so just to tell you a little bit about how effective SROs have been in our county system, during the 2018 to 2019 school year, 163 MCPS students were arrested, and in 120 of those cases, the arresting officer was a school resource officer. And the arrest rate, kind of expanding off of that, the arrest rate for all students during the 2018 to 2019 school year was 0.1%, which ties MCPS for the lowest rate in the state. And between the start of the 2016 to 2017 school year and at the end of the 2018 to 19 school year, 738 MCPS students were arrested on school property or because of incidences on school property. And so again, just to kind of expand on how much progress we made with the SRO system over time. In the 2016 to 2017 school year, 349 MCPS students were arrested. This number actually dropped to 226 in the 2017 to 2018 school year and went down even further to only 163 students in the 2018 to 2019 academic year. The Montgomery County Police Department, of course, recognizes the massive impact that bias and hate may have on an individual or on a community, and so they've recorded all incidences in which bias is present. So in 2018, the department reported 93 bias incidences, which was a decrease from the 123 cases reported in 2017. Oh, yeah, and so furthermore, just to cite some notable statistics about the students who are affected by the SRO system. So federal data tells us that from the 2015 to 2016 school year, African-American students represented 15% of total enrollment, but 31% of students arrested or referred to law enforcement. And state data, according to state data, 60% of the arrests in county schools in the 2017 to 2018 academic year involved African-American students, who accounted for 20% of total enrollment. And so just to sum that up, nationally, the student arrest rate was about 140 per 10,000 enrolled students. But in Maryland, the rate was 217 per 10,000. And in Montgomery County specifically, the rate was a whopping 322 per 10,000, which is well over double the national rate for arrest.
Thank you to the education policy deputies. Now we will be moving into a panelist Q&A. The education policy department has prepared some questions that will be shared and directed towards specific panelists. And once all these questions are answered, we will ask questions that you can send in the chat. If you have a specific panelist that you'd like to ask, then please specify that in the chat.
Thank you, Vicki. And so just to go ahead and introduce some of our guest panelists, we'll just ask that every panelist give a slight introduction about themselves, what they do, and kind of their relation to the SRO program. So first off, Councilmember Evan Glass, if you could introduce yourself. Okay, we'll come back to that. Chief Marcus Jones, could you please introduce yourself?
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Chief Marcus Jones, I'm Montgomery County Police Chief, and it's a pleasure for me to join you all tonight, and thank you all for the invitation to discuss the School Resource Officer Program in Montgomery County.
Thank you. Moving along, Sergeant Dan Helton, could you please introduce yourself?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sergeant Dan Helton. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here. I supervise the SRO program.
Officer Brandon McCloud.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brandon McCloud. I'm a police officer from Montgomery County Police. This is my 13th year, and I'm a school resource officer at Paint Branch High School in Silver Spring. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Mr. Ed Clarke.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be here tonight. My name is Vic Clark. I'm the Chief Safety Officer for Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm also a lifelong resident of Montgomery County, Maryland. I served the Montgomery County Police Department for 25 years, and I spent 5 years with the Maryland Center for School Safety. Thank you for hosting this forum.
Thank you so much. And last but not least was Rebecca Tan.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Tan. I'm a reporter for the Washington Post. I'm not directly involved with the SRO program. I cover local government and politics in Montgomery County, and I wrote an article about the SRO program in February.
Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and move along to our Q&A. Just real quick before we start, Councilmember Evan Glass, if you are able to introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I am Councilmember Evan Glass. I'm an at-large member of the Montgomery County Council, and I am so pleased to be here and part of this conversation tonight.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move along, and we just want to make sure that as we begin the Q&A, we are remaining kind of respectful of everyone's beliefs. I know we have everyone here who has a lot of different thoughts, as well as keeping things respectful in the chat, please. We do have address panelists per question, so if people could try and remain to the address panelists and not speak out of turn, that would be great. And then we'll just try and keep this conversation professional and as constructive as it can be. So first off, our question is for all panelists, and the question is, if you could tell the community one thing you wish you knew about the SRO program, what would that be? So we'll just start off with Councilmember Evan Glass.
If I wanted to tell the community about the SRO program, what would it be? Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay. Well, so that is a really good question and a tough one to start with, because I guess what we have to talk about is what the SRO program was intended to be and what it is today. And so trying to reconcile those two. I was not here, 20 some odd years ago when the first SRO was hired to be in schools. And if memory serves me, I believe it was Gaithersburg High School or near there where the first SRO started. And I'm going to presume it was to make the community feel safe, to make the students feel safe and the teachers feel safe. And as the program continued, much like other programs, sometimes we lose focus of what the original intention was. And so as needs continued to grow and as burdens in our school system continued to grow, where we have more students going to school facing food insecurity, more students going to school facing housing insecurity, we try and solve all these problems within the confines of the walls of our schools and our classrooms. And we have a hard time reconciling that. And I think more and more responsibilities might have been placed on the SROs, maybe possibly. And so what we now have to figure out is, how do we make all of our students feel safe? And it is clear to me that not all of our students feel safe. They don't feel safe in the schools, and they don't feel safe out in their community. And that is the conversation we are grappling with right now: how to make all of you feel safe. And that's why I'm part of this conversation. I'm fully engaged in it, and that we're having these conversations at the council level. And I hope as we continue this evening's conversation, more of you students will share with me and with us your thoughts about the SRO program and what it means for you to feel safe.
Thank you. We'll go on to Chief Marcus Jones.
So thank you. And so what does the SRO program, what would I like people to know is, first and foremost, I think what people need to know is that all of our SROs are caring people and they're human beings. And most importantly, the majority of them are parents. And they are caretakers of a community of large high schools and other schools where their services are needed. They are not there to make arrests. That's not their primary mission. Their mission is to be there, to be a resource. That's why they're called school resource officers. They provide a lot of support to the school staff, and most importantly to the students in the community who are a community within itself, particularly when you have high schools that are 2,000 and 3,000 student population on any given day. So if you look at all of the days that are in a school calendar year, and you equate the work that the school resource officer does, and if you really laid out all of the work that they do as a mentor, teaching classes, civic classes, and providing some input and providing additional support to the school staff, I think when you look at that overall, and to add to the safety component and the information intelligence sharing that helps to maintain school safety and outside of a normal school day that sometimes goes way into the night when we get school threats that are not highly publicized, but it sometimes are harmful to our communities. I think that shows that you have a caring group of people that do their job in a very special way. So that's what I would like to add to this discussion.
Thank you. Sergeant Dan Helton, if you'd like to add to that.
Sure, thank you very much. Something you may not know is the Maryland Center for School Safety under the Maryland Department of Education has significant influence on our SRO program. This includes a civilian review on any SRO use of force. And it also includes mandatory training provided by the state. This is important because this is separate from the training the police department provides our SROs. Though MCPS is the largest school system in the state, our SROs have the least amount of physical arrests. And this is important, 97% of SRO enforcement is school initiated, meaning the school notified the SRO of the offense. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Officer Brandon McCloud.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for having me. I would like to say overall, one thing I have to say about the School Resource Officer Program is a community engagement program. Our desire, our goal is to connect with the students, the staff, the administrators, everyone in the building to make them feel comfortable, make them feel safe, and to add to the culture of the school to be a resource to everyone that starts in the school, that goes, but then leads out into community at large. We're there to make a difference in everyone's life. It's like Chief Jones said, the last thing we want to do is make arrests. We want to be there to build people up, make them feel loved and supported, and be another resource, just like the other resources in buildings like teachers and counselors and principals and assistant principals.
Thank you. Mr. Ed Clarke.
Thank you. I'd just like to build on what's been said. For me, and I was around when the very first SROs came to Montgomery County Public Schools there. And then and now, to me, it's about building those positive relationships with our students, with our school administrators, with our staff, with our counselors, with our security staff members to make sure every student feels safe in school, that they have a trusted adult that they can go to for any type of problem or concern. So I think that's the important thing, to understand the significance of those relationships, both during the school day, in the community, and that the SROs are just one part of what goes into making sure our schools are safe and secure. So all students, regardless of their background, regardless of, the education that they may have gotten in the past, can really get a great education in Montgomery County Public Schools and feel safe and secure.
Thank you. And before we carry on, we have had Councilmember Reimer join us. So if you could just introduce yourself real quick, and then I'll repeat our question.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hans Reimer. I'm one of your 4 at-large county council members. I'm serving my 3rd term, and I chair the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, and I serve on the Transportation Environment Committee. I've got 2 kids, MCPS schools. I got a middle schooler and a rising 4th grader. And I've been working on this issue in different ways almost since I joined the council. I met Ed Clark when he was campaigning, and I was campaigning many, many years ago. And I've got certainly lots to share on this topic. So thank you for the invitation. I think this is a really important dialogue to have.
Thank you so much. And so we just have questions set up with panelists that we're addressing, but real quick, we're just doing one for everyone. So if you could tell the community one thing you wish you knew about the SRO program, what would that be?
Well, you know, I think that our officers who are SROs do a good job. You know, I think that they are great people and doing challenging work, trying to be the trusted adult. And occasionally having to, you know, conduct enforcement. And so I don't come at this from the perspective that the police officers are conducting themselves inappropriately, or that somehow this mission is being mishandled. And I know that there are, you know, I look for data that would contradict that. My view is not so much that they're doing the job badly. I just tend to believe that the figure of a trusted adult, which is what I think we really are going for, is better provided. I think it's an easier job for certain other kinds of professionals to provide that role in the life of a student. And I'm not saying that an officer can't. I just think it may be easier for others to do it. So that is what we all want is a trusted adult for kids who need it. I think that's really what we all agree upon. And I think the real difference is what's the best way to provide that.
Thank you. And then Ms. Rebecca Tan, if you wanted to add on.
Sure, I think a lot of people have said have already provided really interesting perspectives. I will say one thing to the students listening, which is not to underestimate the number of people who don't actually know that the SRO program exists. Like you guys, you know, said in your presentation earlier, it was a program started out in the early 2000s. It's grown year on year, and now it's larger. You know, prior to the killing of George Floyd, it's larger in a lot of states, including Maryland, than ever before. So a lot of the people, your parents, people slightly older than you in their 20s and their 30s, they did not grow up with SROs in schools. They did not grow up with police in schools, so they don't actually know that this is a thing. When we were covering the protests, my colleagues and I often met, older protest goers who had no idea that there were police in public schools. So I wouldn't take that for granted. And if it's something that you want to raise, a conversation that you want to raise with your parents and with older adults, I would encourage you to do that.
Thank you. So we'll start with our second question.
Thank you to all the panelists. This next question is for Mr. Clarke. And can you provide some information about the Maryland Safe to Learn Act and its creation of the Safe Schools Fund, as well as what exact training is required for SROs?
Yes, ma'am, I'd be delighted. As I said before, I served for 5 years at the Maryland Center for School Safety as the executive director. And just to give a little bit of a context, how did the Maryland Safe to Learn Act come about? It came about as a result of two serious tragedies at the national level. The Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, where we had an active shooter where several students, 14 students lost their lives and 3 staff members in February of 2018. About 1 month later, tragically in Maryland, we had our own school shooting incident there at Great Mills High School, where a young student was taken by surprise, was shot from behind by another student. Tragically, that student, Jalen Willie, did not survive her injuries. As a result of those two incidents, Governor Hogan and the state legislature came together to develop legislation known as the Maryland Safe to Learn Act of 2018. It really is what sort of got us moving forward. That legislation is very comprehensive. It provides required training for not only school resource officers, but school security staff throughout the state of Maryland, irrespective of the training that they have within their own departments there. There is a mandatory 40-hour school resource officer training for the SROs, as well as school security staff. That training had to be approved by the Maryland Police Training Commission. But the interesting thing was the Maryland Police Training Commission did not develop that training. That training was developed by educators, school resource officers, counselors, academics. It was a cohesive group or diverse group that developed that training. So it's very comprehensive in nature. Sergeant Helton spoke to it earlier. Different topics that really are important: implicit bias, dealing with students with disabilities, understanding the roles of SROs, that they're not to enforce school rules. It's an outstanding curriculum there. Also in that legislation, the governor and the state legislature funded quite a bit of grant opportunities. There are school safety grants that were $10 million. There was a hate bias grant, still is, to help school systems and communities deal with acts of hate bias. Those grants are available. They've been available for the last 2 years. And there was also additional funding to enhance school resource officers throughout the state of Maryland. I'd just like to make one point of clarification. The Maryland Safe to Learn Act does not require or mandate a school resource officer in every K through 12 public school in the state of Maryland. If SROs are not in the school, then every district has to work with their law enforcement partners to develop an adequate law enforcement coverage plan in the event of emergency or crisis. So that's what the essence of the Safe to Learn Act is. Also, it's very important. A lot of components for prevention and intervention, mental health. Each school district has to have a mental health service coordinator that coordinates and navigates those mental health services for students in our communities. Each school district now is required to have a behavioral threat assessment to try to help and intervene when a student may be in a moment of crisis or pose a threat to themselves, to other in the school or the school community. So there's very little in that act in terms of actual enforcement. It really focuses on prevention, intervention, developing relationships, and comprehensive training for all.
Thank you. Moving on to our third question. This question will be for Officer McCloud. Can you describe your experience as an SRO at Paint Branch High School, as well as your interactions with students?
My experience has been fantastic. Last year was my first year as a school resource officer. So you can imagine coming into the position, I really want to do a good job, just like each and every SRO in the county. And like, how can I connect? How can I really show the student body and the teachers, administrators that I want to be here? Not only be here, I want to be the best SRO they have ever seen or ever had. How can I connect and make people feel comfortable? Because the truth is, not everyone feels comfortable with police officers. It could be they had a negative experience, or a friend had a negative experience, or the fact what they see on TV. It's multiple reasons why someone may be apprehensive about the presence of an officer. And I try to make every day make students feel comfortable in the sense as if you're my child. I'm loving you like a father or uncle love their niece, nephew, or sons and daughters. I'm here. See me more than just a uniform. See me as a human, another professional adult in the building, there to connect, make you feel comfortable, and provide whatever resource that I have available to meet your needs. And a big part of that is making people feel comfortable and knowing that you're there not as an occupying force. We're not there to patrol like on the street. We're there for multiple reasons, which you guys mentioned in the beginning. It all boils down to we are a resource trying to connect, trying to build each and every one up so that they have opportunity to see that policing is more than just enforcement. We provide a quality of service that make you feel comfortable and you may need or may not need. But overall, my experience was fantastic. I love the fact that students made me feel accepted. I love going to the gym classes, playing basketball. I know a couple students made me look bad on the court. I got to work on my game. I love the football games and the basketball games. I love going to the classrooms and have opportunity to teach them about drugs and alcohol and just try to connect and provide service to them. And overall, I love my experience. I'm looking forward to being back in the school building with them.
Thank you. This next question is also for Officer McCloud as well as Mr. Clarke. How do you think students have benefited from the presence of officers in schools, and can you explain the purpose of the SRO program?
I think that one of the great things to having an officer in a building is the opportunity to connect. You get the opportunity to see an officer on a day-to-day basis. The opportunity to build a relationship with the officer. You have opportunity, and when I say build a relationship, I see is the SRO primary job to actively go and try to build a relationship with students around them. Actively going and saying, hi, is there anything I could do? How's your day going? I see that you look upset. Is something that I can help or get an administrator, or you want to go talk to a counselor? It's an opportunity to connect and see an officer as a person that loves them and wants the very best for them. Whereas on the road, you may have the opportunity to stop and have a deep conversation with an officer. Or you may only see an officer once, but then not see them again. By having an SRO in the building, it's consistent. You get to know what SRO is, and you get to utilize their services and their advice, their informed mentoring, their experience in life when they're a teenager and things they see on the road. There's opportunity to connect, where they might not have that out on the street.
And if I could just add to what Officer McCloud said and Chief Jones said earlier, it's about having another trusted adult in that building and just trying to establish those relationships to be part of the climate and culture, the individual schools, that school community, and just a resource where staff can go to, students can go to, and, there's an opportunity to engage in constructive comments, on very controversial topics. So it's building those relationships. It's about respect and building that highway of respect and earning the respect. So I think they're just another asset that we can utilize in the overall umbrella of school safety and security. That's just another example of the value of SROs in our schools, not only in Montgomery County, but throughout the state of Maryland.
Thank you. Moving on, this will be a question for Councilmember Glass and Councilmember Reimer. If cuts had been made to the SRO program, how would you propose reallocating the funds? And is there a possibility to reallocate other funding towards these initiatives?
I'll go first. Well, I mean, what we would do is we would reduce funding for these positions and then increase funding in other areas, for example, school counselors and mental health personnel, but I would go beyond that into athletics programs. I think, a coach is the kind of figure that we also, that I think a lot of kids would turn to. And, there are many other ways that professionals who know how to reach somebody who needs that can be present in a school. So it could be counselors in mental health. It could be through coaching and other kinds of after school programming and clubs. There's a variety of ways that we can increase the resources to students. I think the key, and nonprofits, our nonprofit partners, I think of Identity as a good example. They provide tremendous resources to at-risk kids who, need someone to help navigate the complexity of, being in high school in the community. And so I think funding for nonprofits like that goes a long way to meet these kinds of needs. A general point I want to make is I am concerned that the goal of the program is really community relations. And I think that the proper way for us to think about improving community relations is by reducing over-policing. If we can tackle some of the problems that create poor community relations in the first place, then I think we will find that, we have less need to worry about, building those relationships at the school age. Kids shouldn't have to know a police officer if they don't want to. It's fine, So none of us should have to. I think we should. I think it's a good idea for you to know the police department and how to get help, who to call, how accessible officers are, the fact that they're there to serve you and that they will serve you. Everyone needs to know that. At the same time, I think we should understand that the problems that we're trying to deal with are problems of policy, like, excessive stops, poor response. And if we tackle those problems, I think we'll feel less of a need to do the kind of work that SROs are doing to essentially, compensate for other problematic policies.
So I think that was a really timely question because Councilmember Reimer and I have spent hours upon hours in front of Zoom just this week alone talking about the budget. And on Tuesday or Wednesday, I can't keep track anymore, we approved $43 million in budget cuts to the operating budget here in Montgomery County. And that's because of the COVID health crisis that we're currently in. So tax revenue is down. People are not going out and spending money and conducting business. And so that means lower revenues for Montgomery County and for government operations. And so we had to have some painful conversations just about $43 million. But looking down the horizon, there are going to be tens of millions of dollars more in budget cuts that we are likely going to have. And the unfortunate reality is that most of those budget cuts, almost all of those budget cuts, will not be able to be diverted anywhere else. It's just having the fiscal reality that we're in, and that we're in a recession right now. And so the question that was, this whole SRO conversation came up in the context of a budget because we were trying to save money for Montgomery County. And a few of us, Councilmember Reimer, myself, and others, I don't know if Councilmember Jawando has joined us, but we thought that one of the ways we could save some money was by reducing or deferring the SRO program, because school's not going to be in session this fall. And so let's use this as an opportunity to rethink the program and make some budget savings. That was my position. And so clearly we lost that legislative vote 5-4. But as we have more budget cost-saving conversations in the weeks and months to come, I presume that this will keep coming up as a point of budget savings.
Thank you. This next question is for Chief Jones, Mr. Clarke, Sergeant Helton, and Officer McCloud. And it's according to the MCPS SRO policy, an SRO is a sworn uniformed law enforcement officer trained in emergency preparedness, crisis management, community policing concepts, and problem solving, who is assigned to work as a liaison to MCPS. Can you elaborate on the specific duties and responsibilities of SROs in schools? And we'll start with Chief Jones.
Thank you, Vicki. Yeah, absolutely. That our SROs, their responsibilities are pretty extensive. They have multiple duties that are assigned. Primarily, they are at our high schools at the very beginning to assist with traffic control, helping students get into the school safely. They are then working with the principal on and the security staff with any specific issues that might be underlying throughout the day and safety issues. And again, as I noted, again, we talk about having community engagement and having our officers really being engaged with our young people and having relationships. That's important. Whichever way you look at it, in order to not be afraid of something, you have to be, and particularly people, relationship building is important. And I think that the SROs do a phenomenal job. They are also there for after school activities, such as games, football, basketball games. I've had SROs who've been connected with the athletic teams and have actually traveled with those teams. And I know Mr. Reimer spoke about coaches. I know many of our SROs who were coaches, and who are still coaches in the MCPS system. I've coached, girls softball and lacrosse and football, and there's lots of sports that our SROs are connected to. And so it's more ways than one that they are actively engaged. I have one of my SROs who participates in the band with the Einstein Jazz Band, and has worked with one young man that they go around and they actually tour and have done some presentations throughout the county. And so there's a lot of things that they do, but they also gather intelligence and information that's important to our officers about what's going on. For example, at Blair High School, we've had problems with MS-13 who are recruiting students into their gang. And they've been around Blair High School, literally standing on the sidewalk when kids get out of school every day, and they know who they're targeting. They know who are the young people who may have just come over into the United States who might be vulnerable to be in a gang. And the SRO works actively with our gang unit in order to deter those gang members from actually doing such recruiting, not only at our high schools, but at our middle schools. And the information that they have, because they work with the security staff, they work with them directly, they know the information, then they know some of the students are free to come to them and share that information. That's valuable. That's not something that's going to be on the news. That's not something, but at the end of the day, we're preventing somebody potentially from being forced into a gang or for some other crime that could be occurring. And I think that's an important piece for our county, that we have SROs who care and who are providing pertinent information to assist our students to be safe.
Thank you. And before we keep going, we have Councilmember Jawando here with us now. Could you please introduce yourself real quick? And if you wouldn't mind just mentioning the bill that has been brought up in County Council regarding SROs.
Sure, thank you. I was watching from the other room and it was good conversation. Will Jawando, Councilmember at large, and great to be with you all tonight. And again, albeit virtually, really proud of the work that the Student Government Association has done, and I'm glad to be with you. I think as I heard Councilmember Glass mention this effort, I wrote a letter to my colleagues, first in committee, in the Public Safety Committee, seeking to eliminate the SRO position and lapse those positions. With the officers that are in them, like Officer McCloud, wouldn't have been fired. They would have just been reallocated to some other place within the department. I think that's important to note too. There's some misinformation about that. But we would be able to, if we did that, and considering now that we know school will be closed at least through January, that would allow us to, in FY22 budget, to reallocate that $3 million, because we would be taking advantage of lapsed and unfilled positions at the department, to reallocate that to some critical needs. We have a student to counselor ratio of one counselor to 250 students, student to nurse ratio, one nurse to 1,600 students in our high schools. These are trained professionals that are there to support the needs, the psychological, the safety, the health, the wellness of our students. And again, I know many of our SROs. I've met Mr. McCloud before. These folks are good people that care about students. It's not a question of are they good people or do they care about students? It's what's the right tool when we have those types of disparities in resources, realizing our job from the county council is to decide how do we best support the county, and in this case, our students, and that money needs to be other places. And the other thing is you have to think about the harm that's being done. If we haven't talked about it yet, if you look at who's been arrested, most of the students, over the last 4 years, around half have been African-American students, even though they account for a fifth of the population. And you'll hear that, oh, well, those were referred by other teachers and they weren't all initiated by the SROs. and and that may be true. But what I know is that just the mere presence of an SRO increases the likelihood that that referral can happen. If you look at the breakdown of the statistics of what these offenses are, some of them are called attacking a student, some which could be known as a fight. You know, there's obviously different levels of severity there. Some are for drug possession. Again, I've been in schools where I've gotten into fights myself, and I've seen drugs at school, and I've seen kids not get arrested. And so when you have disproportionality like that, and you have the need that we have budgetarily to support these other things, I think it's an easy decision to reallocate those funding and to get these officers who are really, many of them, good at community relations, doing that in the community where we desperately need that. So that failed 5-4. I appreciate Councilmembers Reimer and Glass supporting, but I think we're going to need to revisit this, as unfortunately we're probably going to have to save more money in our budget and make more tough decisions. And then again, that's what this is about.
Thank you. So we'll just go on back to the question that Chief Jones had answered. So if Mr. Ed Clarke, you want to go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to discuss briefly the part about the role of the SRO in emergency preparedness. When there is a critical emergency, a life-threatening emergency, having that SRO on the campus is significant in terms of a positive outcome. And I go back to what happened in Great Mills High School. There was a working SRO there that day when that tragedy occurred. The SRO immediately responded, tried to intervene with the student who had shot Jalen Willie, tried to negotiate that student to surrender. It didn't work out, but that SRO was there immediately. Our SROs in Montgomery County Police have helped us in Montgomery County, and all of our students know our drills, our lockdown with options drills. They helped us develop those options and those protocols there. So when there is that critical emergency, and we know that most of these active shooter events, they occur infrequently, they're generally over within 10 minutes. Having a properly and effectively trained SRO on that school campus can help with a positive outcome. I was down at Great Mills for 3.5 weeks. We participated in the after-action debriefing. We talked to teachers, we talked to students. I will tell you, coming through that dark portal of recovery is a huge challenge. I hope that we never see any significant crises like that ever again in our state, but we have to be prepared to respond in those critical moments when such a serious threat is there, because the community in St. Mary's County is still in recovery. Thank you.
Thank you. Sergeant Helton.
Yes, thank you, and good evening to all the council members. Good to see you. The SRO's ultimate responsibility is to work in collaboration with the school system to provide a safe learning environment. SROs do this by building relationships with school staff, students, and their families, and I can't underscore that more. And like Chief Jones says, SROs wear several hats. They are a former counselor, like a mentor, an adjunct instructor. They get into the classroom, emergency managers, just like we heard about, and they're also in law enforcement. There are times where the school notifies the SRO to take enforcement action, but this is not their primary responsibility, nor are SROs part of the school disciplinary process. That is something the school takes care of. Thank you.
Thank you. Officer McCloud.
Hi. Yes. Sergeant Helton, Chief Jones, and Mr. Clarke did an excellent job going over the different hats that we wear. I guess I'd like to just draw attention to the fact that being inside the building, when we're called, take law enforcement action, say a student has drugs or there's a theft or something like that, by having relationships with administration and with students and with security, if there is opportunity to avoid making an arrest, then we can be resolved that way because we're inside the building. We have conversation with everyone involved. And that's very important, knowing that having us there for that regard, that not everything needs to be handled in an arrest. In fact, the arrest should be the last thing that we look to do. So if we can sit down with everyone, talk, get the property back, find out the victim, for instance, do not want charges for theft, just want the property back. And then officers working with counselors and just really encouraging the student who did make the bad mistake to just think about decision making in the future and figure out what's the underlying reasons for them to get to that place in the first place. It's that opportunity for SRO to go out in the community or work with the counselors to try to get a student a job, or just try to plug them into different resources that may be out there but may be causing underlying issues. Another thing, by being an SRO, you're able to not only connect with the students and faculty and staff, but also with parents. If there's an issue that a student feels comfortable going to a counselor and the counselor sees it appropriate to include the SRO, then the SRO can go into the community and talk with the parents to help bridge the gap, make sure that everyone's on the same page. So it's very important that as an SRO, that we are able to make those connections, not only in the school building, but also outside the building and bring everyone together.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, as we keep going for all panelists and everyone watching, we will be wrapping up questions that we have prepared in about 45 minutes. So if everyone could try and keep their answers short, and then we will be taking questions from the chat. So the next question will be for everyone to answer. We'll start with Councilmember Jawando. And the question is, do you feel the SRO program is equitable for students of all backgrounds? And if not, what changes do you feel could be made?
Thank you. I'll be much briefer this time. The short answer is no. Again, I think if you just look at the data, it's not a subjective question. If you look at who is disproportionately arrested by SROs, it's Black students, and it is what it is. So you either have to assume that Black students are criminal, or that there's something disproportionate happening, and it mirrors our disproportionality in our juvenile arrests and our arrests for adults. 50% of the people arrested in 2018 in the county were Black. We represent 19% of the population. That's similar for juvenile arrests. And again, we have to dig into that. And we're all working really hard right now. And I've been pushing for a while, and we're on the precipice of reimagining public safety and looking into those numbers. And so just on its face, and while there are a lot of really good examples of anecdotal incidents of support or of a SRO serving in the role as a trusted adult, students, kids need trusted adults. The question is, should they be those that are trained to just support, that don't have that law enforcement aspect to them? And I think that the answer is yes. And especially when we have the budget trade-offs. And so I think there is disproportionate harm. All the data shows us that nurses, counselors, you hear counselors being mentioned a lot. Those are shown to improve safety. Security guards are in the building. There's a lot of stories about security guards as well being helpful and trusted adults, a different role, not authorized to arrest. And so I think we have other options to support students and keep them safe without using police interaction. And the last thing I'll say is, it's not to say that there shouldn't be improved police-community relations. There should be. And not to say that there's not a role for police to be in schools in a programmatic way, i.e. Coming in to talk about their role or their job, or having real conversations like this one with students in a format that allows them to talk and exchange, where there's not a potential for enforcement action. The role of the officer in there as the potential for enforcement action scares some students and then leads to disproportionate results for others. And so that's the issue for me.
Thank you. Ms. Tam, could you go next?
Sorry, I don't think I'm in a position to say what I feel necessarily, but I think Councilmember Jawando touched on some of the perspectives that he had already, but I will just highlight that when it comes to issues of equity, and I think a lot of students already understand this, which is what I'm reading from the chat here, it's not about individuals, it's not about individual intent, and it's not about what one specific officer does or feels. It's about sort of trends over time, right? Which is what Councilmember Jawando and I think some lawmakers have been looking into. That's probably all I can say on the topic.
Thank you. Councilmember Evan Glass.
I think my colleague, Mr. Jawando, said it very well, that the data speak for itself, and that if we are trying to treat every student fair and equitably, when we have nearly 50% of the students who are arrested through this SRO program being Black, that says something, and it says something very loudly. And that's why I can't ignore that, and trying to figure out how we do better by every student, and the wraparound services, making sure that students are in the best position to learn. And again, I said this in my opening statements, but making sure that kids don't go to school with food insecurity, housing insecurity, economic insecurity. There are so many ways that we can help lift up our students and put them in the best position to be in the classroom where they are learning, that I think we need to devote more energy and attention there.
Thank you. Chief Jones?
So the one thing I think that we all have to look at is, first of all, is behavior. And the one thing that's important in the MOU that we have with Montgomery County Public Schools, when we look at what our role as the police and the SROs, what our role is we specifically made sure that there were only specific offenses that the police would arrest for, physical arrests, for any event that occurs in our school. And those events would be, for example, bringing weapons to school, a gun, or a knife that's illegal, and robbery. Some of the most serious offenses, aggravated assault, which means it's more than a fight. It means it's someone who seriously got injured as a result of a fight. And when we have victims in these types of cases where there's robberies or those aggravated assaults, unfortunately, even if we as the police would not be in the school as an SRO program, we would still be getting called to Montgomery County Public Schools to investigate those incidents and to address those incidents accordingly. And if in any regard, we will be making arrests. I think in these cases where we have SROs at our schools, the bottom line resides is the fact that you have SROs who have these relationships that Officer McCloud has noted, that at times who can also sort of divert a student from not even being arrested. And we don't even, and unfortunately, and we may need to start doing this, is we need to start documenting those such events. The events where you have individuals who, quote, are arrested on paper. And again, as you noted, as we noted earlier, 90% of the cases that are really brought before us, a great deal of those cases aren't cases that the officer was walking around the school and saw an offense occur. It was brought because it was a violation on school property and it was against the law. And so it's not that it was a discipline problem, because we don't get involved in discipline problems. So with that being said, again, it begs the deeper community question when we talk about how we look at the behaviors, and we need to look at each of these cases separately to see, again, how to handle. Now, when cases are, quote, documented on paper, and you might say they're documented as an arrest, that doesn't mean that the individual is actually, when we talk about this school to prison pipeline, that is actually, that something's not being done to divert that particular case. That student may not even be charged in the juvenile system. Those cases are screened and they're provided with other diversion opportunities. Some students are actually diverted to juvenile, to the court that's been set up, the moot court that the students have set up to address the students' behavior and for outcomes, such as community service and the like. So it's a much more extensive look at what's actually occurring in our schools, more so than just the fact that it's a physical arrest. For the most serious offenses, but even those that are on paper, that are documented, that there's still an opportunity for diversion. And the reason why those cases are on paper is for the fact that if, for example, if a student was caught with drugs in the school, and again, if it's a minor offense, that is actually just the drugs are seized. The student is not taken out of school. Actually, it's the school handles it from their disciplinary process, but we document it and then submit it to the juvenile system to allow them to create the diversion programs or the like through the state's attorney's office and the juvenile justice system. So does this give us concern? Yes, the bottom line states, though, to me is it's a much deeper problem than just simply saying that we, the police, are arresting students of color like we're doing this intentionally and not arresting anyone else just because we can. And that's not the case. Again, it's these things that are brought to police officers' attention and that they are handled accordingly with procedure that we've addressed with Montgomery County Public Schools for the most serious offenses. But we also recognize that we're not trying to disrupt the school day itself. So for the minor offenses, those are documented on paper. The student's not arrested, not taken out of school, but this situation is documented, whether it's a theft, sometimes that we get that are phones or some other incident where we have victims. You have another student who's actually a victim of this particular incident that needs to be documented. So I think we need to really look at a more holistic. When we're looking at a holistic problem, we need to really look at it more on a case-by-case basis of what exactly are these arrests for. When we really break down at each school, what are the arrests for? And when we can really get into that, we have a better understanding of what maybe the problem is that lies within our community.
Thank you. Mr. Clarke.
Thank you. Living in Montgomery County, we all know we are a very diverse community. We are the most diverse community in the state of Maryland. Our school district is the most diverse as well. So for me, I think we can take advantage of the opportunity to enhance our cultural awareness training, our cultural competency training, not only for just the SROs, but for staff as well. And that's very important. Also, I think a new trend when we talk about diversion opportunity is restorative justice. How can that work for all of us as a appropriate measure to deflect a potential criminal arrest and to connect victims with the offenders in a constructive way? So I think enhanced training up and down the line can really benefit all of us in our school communities.
Thank you. Sergeant Helton?
Yes, thank you. So do I think the SRO program is equitable? Absolutely. The environment with the SROs have to work in and the system outside of policing, is that necessarily equitable? That's something I think we need to take a little bit of a deeper look at, especially when I see that overall in the last 3 years, 97%, like I said, of SRO enforcement is school initiated, and they're asking the SROs to respond and take action with enforcement. But what I can talk about is as far as the SROs and what they're trained. Like I mentioned, they receive training from the state, from the police department, and this includes topics such as constructive interactions with youth, informal counseling, youth development, trauma-informed schools, disability and diversity awareness, de-escalation, restorative practices like we just heard about implicit bias. And we also receive training from MCPS itself. So, schools are they have a contrast at times as far as the profile of students from one school to another. And so they have unique challenges, and the students require more services depending on what that school is. Well, the SROs are part of that school team, and they go to the staff meetings and they go to the staff trainings. And so if there's a particular school maybe has an autism program or a learning center at the school or whatever the makeup is, because diversity goes beyond just race. What training is the SROs getting at their school so they can better serve the students at their school? So that's something we work on. Can we make it better? Absolutely. That's why it's so important to a lot of our community partners and our stakeholders in the community to find out what's working best and get their feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reimer?
You know, what I can add to the conversation here, I mean, when students see the video of George Floyd's murder, I hate to say it, but if you're a white student, you see that video and you're horrified, but you don't necessarily think that it might happen to you, because you know that you're safe from that, and not for a lot of reasons. But if you're a Black student, you don't feel that way. Today, if you're a Black student, I think often you feel that you're not safe around police. And I know that the purpose of this program is to try to address that, but I think the way to address it is with other kinds of policy changes that will make people ultimately in the bigger picture feel safer around police. And so I think it's inequitable to have officers in the schools that make a lot of students feel uncomfortable and insecure in a way that other students don't feel. And again, I want to say like that is not because of the actions of any of the SROs themselves. You know, what they're doing is typically very sincere, outreach and mentorship and deep personal relationship building. But I still can't get around. I have to acknowledge that not all students feel the same. And I think that those are related to deeper inequities in our society. And I think the way to solve that is with the kinds of changes we're making now: reduce the use of force, find other ways to solve public safety issues that maybe don't rely on police as much, and solve through other means. I think this is a big picture conversation. It's a long-term issue, and we've got to figure that out. And then we may not feel like we have to devote so much energy to repairing community relations, because the community relations are stronger.
Thank you. And Officer McCloud?
SRO's main goal are to treat everyone the same. We do not pick and choose who we want to talk to, who we don't want to talk to. Our desire, our goal is to make everyone feel comfortable. And if there's a particular school or if there's any situation where students do not feel comfortable because the SRO have done something, then that's the time to start conversations inside the school with the administrative staff, with security, with teachers, because the goal is we're in a building, we want to make everyone feel comfortable. And every SRO I know how we train is to treat everyone fairly and treat everyone the same.
Thank you. This next question is for Ms. Tan. As you have been reporting on the topic of SROs for the Washington Post, is there anything interesting you found out about SROs in schools while writing your articles?
I think all of it is pretty interesting to me, but I think when in the specific article that you're thinking of, what I found sort of most, the core of the story basically was these conflicting ideas of what was safe for students, right? It was two main questions. It was safe from what and safe for whom, right? And I think in addressing both those questions, you have to look sort of into the history of the SRO program, which you guys did very well in the presentation earlier. It started with the Columbine shooting, waxed and waned, and then school shootings have become a real concern, right? So I think for me, what's most interesting about it is that the SRO program is really at this nexus, is at the intersection of two major, quote unquote threats or concerns of young people today. The first is school shootings, which is a horrific reality, only in the US, really, across the world. And the second thing is these ideas of inequities, racial inequities, which young people rightfully are very concerned about, right? And in trying to sort of figure out the tensions between both of these issues, there are a lot of questions that need to be addressed, right? The one question that I think has already come up in the chat is whether the SRO program is effective in keeping students safe, is effective in stopping school shootings. We know that in one of the most recent, the largest school shooting in recent U.S. history, Parkland shooting, there was an SRO on site and he wasn't able to stop, the tragedy that happened afterward. And then the second question is whether SROs could or do the SR program, not SROs, but the SR program perpetuates sort of racial inequities that already exist. And I think that's a difficult question to answer, as you saw, from all the panelists just a second ago, in part because it's not just to do with the SROs, right? It's sort of at every step of an interaction, inequity can enter. I think Officer McCloud and the Sargeant and Chief Marcus Jones have mentioned earlier that the vast majority of arrests that happen at MCPS are initiated by school administrative officers or by teachers and principals and things like that. That doesn't mean that the arrest can't be inequitable. That doesn't mean that inequity hasn't entered the arrest process at some point, because how teachers assess what is threatening, how students assess what is threatening to them can also be influenced by inequity. So whether the program in its sort of wholeness perpetuates inequities is a very difficult question to answer, just because there are so many players that have a say. But I know you guys are rushing for time, so we can probably move on.
Thank you. And just to touch on that, we are going to do a hard cutoff at 7:35 to start audience questions. So if everyone could just keep their answers short, and we're just going to announce everyone that is a directed panelist. And then from there, not everyone has to answer. But so this next question will be for Chief Jones and Officer McCloud. According to state data released by the MCPS Board of Education, Black, Hispanic, and special education students are disproportionately arrested by school resource officers. How are MCPD and school resource officers ensuring that they promote a positive relationship with the students they serve, a majority of which are Black or Hispanic in Montgomery County?
So I think that the way that you promote positive relationships is, again, creating the atmosphere to have a relationship. And I think our SROs, by engaging in our student with conversations, there's lots of opportunities for that to occur. It occurs during, many hours during the day, such as during the lunch period, before and after school or between classes, that we know that SROs have developed excellent relationships with some of our students throughout Montgomery County Public Schools. So in order to foster it, it has to be, again, an openness and willingness to talk and have these conversations about each other and about the school environment and anything else. And I think, that our SROs go out of their way to try to create that environment to the best of our ability. But again, we work with very large school populations. So, to have the opportunity to do it with each and every student is maybe not possible, but, it is an opportunity.
Thank you. Officer McCloud.
The fact that you just mentioned is very alarming and definitely need to be looked into. I can tell you that as an officer, we treat everyone the same. If we've been brought down to the office to deal with an arrest situation, we're not there picking and choosing. But the fact that so many Blacks, Hispanics, and other individuals are disproportionately being affected should be investigated. And I highly encourage all of us, all stakeholders, to look at it deeply. And on an everyday basis, like the Chief just said, while SROs are in school, we're looking for actively to connect with students. If that's going around saying hi, I think one thing I like to do is during lunchtime, go to a student's store so I can help pass out food. Or if it's going to after practice, to encourage them. Finding out ways that you could connect with everyone in the building at different opportunities, at different times throughout the day. And another thing that SROs have responsibility of doing is bringing in programs. I know that we at Paint Branch, we did not get a chance to get up and running, but something I want to bring to the school once we're back in session is street law. so that students have opportunity to learn about how can they promote justice and have real conversations about law enforcement in the classroom setting. It could be during school or after school program to help everyone feel comfortable.
Thank you. This next question is for council members Jawando, Reimer, Glass, as well as Ms. Tan. So the Maryland Safe to Learn Act of 2018 states that the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission and local school systems are expected to develop a specialized curriculum for use in training of SROs, which includes diversity training. Based on your research, do you believe additional training for SROs should be required to better accommodate disabled students and students of color in an educational environment? And we'll start with Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Vicki. Obviously, I think we should move away from the program, but if they were to stay, as is the case today, more training is certainly not a negative thing. I think that a lot of this discussion has been, how do we make SROs as trusted adults and the program in general? We're trying to serve multiple purposes, which is really hard, right? It's hard to do 5 or 6 things very well. And in the case of a counselor, we're trying to make folks counselors, law enforcement officers, confidants. If you even just listen to the description, I think it's a tall order. And then when you look at the disparity, again, sure, should we have more training? All of our officers should have more training on some of the things that were mentioned. One of the things that has been mentioned in the context, not here tonight, but in my work on this issue was, well, you don't want the regular officers coming to being called and coming to the police, coming to the school, because then you'll get really bad outcomes. And my response to that is, well, one, I hope that's not true, because all of our officers should, be treating everyone with respect and in a non-biased way. But so the question is, does their presence just in and of itself, regardless of the training, in light of the whole system that I think Ms. Tan made a really good point about the referrals that are happening from teachers and principals. If you look at who's suspended and expelled, we have very disproportionate data that's similar to the arrest data, and those are decisions made by administrators. So I agree with some of the things that have been said by my law enforcement colleagues here, that we need to look upstream as well as at disparate discipline. But in short, I would say more training is a good thing. But I think there's a larger question that obviously we're discussing tonight about whether this is the right tool, the right programmatic approach to the goals that are being outlined here. And I think on balance, it's not.
Thank you. Councilmember Reimer?
I think Councilmember Jawando just said it very well. I don't really have anything to add to his comments.
Councilmember Glass?
The only thing I will add is the fact that school will not be conducted in the classroom in the fall. And so let's use this opportunity to rethink how we keep kids safe in the classroom. Now is the time that we should be doing this. For no other reason, we might have these budget issues that actually, allowed us to engage in this conversation, but we should be taking advantage of this opportunity to make sure that when kids do return into the classroom next year, that everybody feels safe. So all those conversations should be going on now, but I think we're missing this opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Tan?
Not much more to add. You guys can move forward.
Thank you. This question can be for Chief Jones, Mr. Clarke, Sergeant Helton, and Officer McCloud. But like we mentioned, you guys can feel free to pass if you feel that everyone has said anything. In reference to the Maryland Safe to Learn Act of 2018, can you provide further details about the diversity training SROs receive? Is there any follow-up to ensure all SROs are bringing this training into schools?
So one thing I know is, the diversity training our officers have received, it's not just one time. Our officers receive diversity training in Montgomery County and have done so for well over 20 years. And we've always developed and looked to move that program forward. And we make sure that we're monitoring our officers' behavior as we go through the school year, how they're evaluated, and how we address any issues that remain. But we know that, again, when officers who are interviewed for the school resource program, we talk to them about diversity issues. We ask them about that, and we look at their past history as well before they are selected. And we also bring in principals who are part of the selection panel and part of that process to accept that. If I could just address really quickly Mr. Glass's piece about the opportunity to have SROs to eliminate them in the budget since we're not in school. Let me explain to you what SROs did in the spring of this year as school was out. Our SROs were actively involved with MCPS in the food distribution of lunches and other food that was given out, and we're very active in that. And they were, again, a team partner, community partner they were willing to assist and provide other assistance during this COVID response. They continue to do that. And again, that shows you the flexibility. And the last thing I'll just add to this discussion is and when we talk about the Safe to Learn Act, that at the end of the day, I will still be responsible for providing safety to the school systems as we do each and every day. And I will not defer upon my responsibility, nor will I be held liable for not providing a safe school environment here in Montgomery County. So as Chief of Police, that's my responsibility. And I will make sure our schools are safe. And so with that being said, regardless if the SRO program is eliminated, and if that's the way it's decided, then we will move forward. But I will tell you, we will move forward in a way that I will still maintain the safety for all of our students, because I care about them and my police department cares about all of our students in Montgomery County Public School System.
Thank you.
If I could add a little bit to what the chief was saying there, I think when the Maryland Safe to Learn Act was created, it was a great training opportunity. Now we can go back and reflect and see if we need additional training or enhanced training in that area of diversity, cultural awareness, and things like that. The other thing, I just want to echo what Chief Jones said. As Chief Safety Officer, I have the ultimate responsibility to work with multiple partners to keep all of our students, 164,000, all of our employees safe. That is a very, very tough task. I know the chief wakes up in the middle of the night just like I do. We share that same bond. This is our community. We want everybody in the school environment to feel safe and secure, regardless of where they come from, regardless of who they may live with. That's our mutual goal. Safety is number one, and we have a great partnership not only with Montgomery County Police, but all of our law enforcement partners in Montgomery County. So I'm proud to stand with the chief. It's an awesome responsibility, and we all take school safety and security very, very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add?
If I could just add real quick, I know it asked about the training we get, and Mr. Clark and the chief, I appreciate that. That's definitely one of the things I want to add to it is that we work, not just the training we get on the department, but we also work with the SRO program in collaboration with MCPS for training. And Mr. Clark talked about some of that, but also in collaboration with the Maryland Center for School Safety under the Maryland Department of Education. So to make sure they have the best training, to make them successful and productive and effective in that school environment. Thank you.
Hi.
Vicky, if you want to move to the next one.
Okay. The next question is for Ms. Tan. is there a similar sentiment about reviewing or removing SRO programs in other local counties? And if so, what actions are local counties taking, if any?
Yeah, a lot. So prior to the killing of George Floyd, it was an issue that was sort of flying underneath the radar. There would be attention and interest in it every time there'd be like a cell phone video or a security footage of an SRO using excessive force against a student. Every time that happened, it would become national news. People would talk about it briefly, but it was never. It didn't really have sustained interest. And then, obviously, the killing of George Floyd has sparked a nationwide interest in policing, and that has led to renewed calls for police-free schools, as they're called. We saw police-free schools on signs and on banners during the protests in DC and across the country. And since then, there really have been a bunch of local school districts and local governments that have taken action against or involving the SRO program. Minneapolis, Denver, Seattle, and Oakland have all scrapped the SRO program completely defunded it. I think in most cases, the police officers will reallocate it to other departments, similar to what Councilmember Jawando said earlier. And there are dozens more other school districts and local county governments that are thinking about doing similar things or considering it, debating it, similar to what Montgomery already has done. And, in all these discussions that they're asking a lot of the same questions that you have in this panel, which is, what are the roles and responsibilities of a police officer? Does expanding police presence work? Does diversity training work? Should a county invest resources and county dollars and taxpayer dollars in all of these things? So short answer, very much yes.
Perfect, thank you. So we're actually going to move on to audience questions now, just because we're getting a lot of feedback from participants. I'm so sorry if I butcher any of our participants' names. We had a question from Naomi Niwokama and Abby Kusman. If a situation arises where a police force is needed, the schools can call for these services. Most instances of school violence only need a security guard or mental health worker to intervene. What is the need of having a police officer in schools? So anyone can feel free to answer this question. We're just going to try and keep them to only a couple minutes long, so we might have to cut people off. But if anyone wants to go ahead.
I can jump in briefly. I think the answer, thank you for the question. I would agree with you. I think that's one thing we didn't really talk about a lot tonight is restorative justice was mentioned, but by Mr. Clarke, and I'm glad he did. We have started to do that. One of my children actually has participated in one of those processes after an incident at school, and the role of the security guards. One of my mentors and friends is Cedric Boatman, who was an all-star Blair All-American at Blair in basketball, and for a long time was a cluster security coordinator. And the relationships that they have and the training that they have with students, again, in a non-enforcement capacity, and coupled with mental health therapists, counselors, nurses, the like, which again, significant data shows that the students feel comfortable and safer and that they perform better when you have better ratios of those people, nurses, counselors, therapists. We have to, again, remind ourselves about that data. I think that is the answer in many, many situations. And in the rare cases that law enforcement does need to be called, they have time, to get there. We have to remember, we always haven't been in a, SROs it's not like it's been around since 1776. It's a relatively recent phenomenon. And after, some of the mass shootings that we've seen. And I think Ms. Tan mentioned this. There's some research on mass shootings that have suggested that even when an SRO or an armed security guard is present, that doesn't necessarily deter a mass shooting. And so we have to look at it in totality. And I would say that I think those are reasonable interventions, again, that we should be funding in place of a program like an SRO program.
If I can answer that, absolutely right. In terms of just a school fight, students make bad decisions. And a simple fight happened when I was young, it happens now. Absolutely, school security should take the lead. And majority of the times on school campus, school security administrations are the ones taking the lead. However, one thing that SROs can do to enhance the security is making sure that it doesn't spread out into the community. Because oftentimes students will leave the campus and then go fight in the community. So in a situation in which students let the SRO know that there is a possibility of a fight after school in a community, then as an SRO, you can relate that information to surrounding officers to help circulate and help prevent the fight from occurring in the first place.
And if I could just add to the school security piece, we're very proud of our 220 plus school-based security staff. They work with our principals, our counselors, the SROs. They can develop those relations as well. So it's a holistic team approach. I think you just bundle everything together that goes into the equation of creating safe schools and supportive schools. Thank you.
I'll just add, I don't think anybody believes that there will not be the need for police officers to come to a school. Unfortunately, that's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. We have a lot of incidents, with guns coming to schools, and, gang predation has been mentioned. There's going to be instances where police are the appropriate response. I think the issue is really, for example, security officers are able to provide a lot of the security needs and do so in a way that is just more comfortable for a lot of students. I don't think anyone should come away from this conversation saying that there's never going to be a need for police officers to come to school. We understand that that's going to be the case, but hopefully it can be, hopefully it'll be less frequently, and the more day-to-day responsibility can be fulfilled by people who may have more success in that work. I mean, I keep going back to my belief that trying to do a lot of this work with a badge on is really pushing a boulder uphill, and that there are other types of professionals who may find it easier to succeed with the same basic job of trying to help kids who are in need. There's other work that SROs do that is not mentorship or guidance or support, that is just more related to basic security issues. But I really do think that we could get more benefit, more outcomes, more positive outcomes for the same investment by investing in a different type of personnel, which is not a knock against the efforts of our SROs. I've seen how hard they work and how dedicated they are. It's just that I think that they often have to overcome the badge. And why should we put them in that position? Why not just have someone else trying to do the same work who doesn't have that basic barrier?
Thank you. We're going to move along to the next question now.
So this has been asked in the chat. What are the racial demographics of MCPS SROs, and is that taken into account when hiring new SROs or assigning them to schools, primarily minority majority schools? And as a follow-up, do you believe that has had an impact on higher incidents of bias or arrests?
So, the demographic breakdown of our school resource officers for this past school year, we had 10 African-American males. We had 5 African-American females. We had 1 Hispanic male. We have, and I should say we have because we still have them. We have 8 white males, and we have 2 white females. And I think we have a very diverse staff of SROs. And again, all of these SROs are who voluntarily apply for the position. They are not selected out, without going through a process. And these, again, they actually apply to be in the SRO program. And then they actually are applying for specific schools. And again, the principal of those high schools, and these are for high schools, the principals are part of the selection process for that standpoint. I do not believe that the SROs, again, even with the racial makeup, show any bias. Again, we've talked about how arrests are made, based upon what is brought before us or what the officer sees. And again, those are incidents that, again, are the most serious incidents that are outside of the disciplinary MCPS mode. So I think from that standpoint, when we look at it, we're looking at it based upon the incidents that are occurring in our schools.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would just like to mention, too, that the majority of our SROs are from the Montgomery County Department of Police, but our Sheriff's Department, Gaithersburg City, and Rockville City, they also have SROs in their respective school communities there. So it's that partnership between Chief Jones, Sheriff Popkin, and our municipal chiefs.
Great. Thank you so much. Moving on to the next question that we've had a lot tonight. Is it necessary for SROs to have guns? If so, why?
Well, I will speak to that. As a police officer, our police officers, based upon their responsibilities, are required to carry their weapon while they're on duty. And again, that is something that, as a police officer, and for the safety and security in their role as a school resource officer and as a police officer in general, because they have to act even beyond school property. So if there's something that happens outside of the school that pushes them into the community, they still have the responsibility. So there is a responsibility, as a requirement for them to carry their handgun. And again, those individuals, who understand what is their role. And again, as law enforcement officers, we know, when, even though our handgun is with us most of the time and all of the time when we're on duty, but even off duty, that we have a responsibility to the community.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to add to that?
I'll just add briefly. I think the chief answered the technical part of the question. I will say, though, undergirding that question is kind of this how students feel. I think Councilmember Reimer talked about this earlier. One of the things, it's just unconscionable to me, and one of the reasons I push this so hard right now, I've always felt this way, but about the SRO program, but I think it's so critically important now is that on the heels of everything that's happening in our country, many students are going to come back whenever we come back and not be very fearful of seeing police. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't work on that issue, and that's not a challenge, but it's a larger societal issue. And the issue of militarization and how police present and how they protect and serve is a very real and present issue. I mean, I think we do better than most in many areas of the country. But if you just take things like the gun, how they're dressed, the black uniform, that was a tactical change made at some point. When I was an AmeriCorps member serving with the Montgomery County Police, you had the brown uniforms. And so there's a question of how do we present and how do we present ourselves to the public? And that's a larger question about reimagining public safety, but it's particularly important in the school building. Again, the school building is about learning and about growth and development. And as I have 4 children. I know many people on this call have children. You want your kids to feel 100% safe and developed and nurtured in a school building. And so how teachers, how principals, how anyone who's in that building interacts and presents themselves is something that we need to be thinking about.
Thank you. Vicki, if you want to go ahead.
What is the current budget for the SRO program and how is it spent? How does the SRO program budget compare with the budget for counseling programs in Montgomery County?
So I don't have the specific numbers, but our SRO program, basically it's really equated to salary and benefits of the officer that's assigned to that school. So out of the 21 SROs that I believe that I have that are assigned to the schools, it's the cost per officer. That's a cost. Now, again, if the SRO program was eliminated, that doesn't mean I have 17 less police officers. And in reality, I would be strongly against having 17 less police officers here in Montgomery County. Because at the end of the day, as I noted, there's still going to be a responsibility for us as the police department to still have some responsibility under the Safe to Learn Act to provide adequate coverage for our school system. And I don't have extra officers that are available now to provide that service. So I have to be able to manage that. So as it relates to, it's very interesting to me from a large MCPS school budget that has half of the budget here in Montgomery County, that we would be looking at the police department to take away from the police department our funding. That is, again, out of a $288 million budget, 80% of my budget goes to salary and benefits for not only the law enforcement officers, but also for our support personnel. So again, that is the cost. But again, that will be the cost of our school resource program that we will be taking taken away from that particular program, but be reallocated.
If I could jump in, Chief Jones, I appreciate the context that you provided. And again, the moment that we're in, we're in a turning point in American history with the civil unrest that's taking place because of George Floyd's murder and so many people before him. But we are also dealing with this economic downturn because of COVID-19, which has forced upon the county government to cut from our budget. And budgets are moral documents. And so as we look forward in the coming weeks and months to the likelihood of having to cut tens of millions of dollars more, there are no easy solutions here. And so we will have to figure out whether or not budget from MCPS will be cut, or the police department, or affordable housing, or food insecurity, whatever it might be. Those are all on the table, and it is our tough job to make those decisions, which is why we're having this conversation now, because 4 of us thought that in the budget savings we could find some savings here, and so I suspect we will have to revisit this in the coming weeks.
If I could just add, the whole HHS department, which provides, the mental health picture in the school system is dual, right? So you have nurses, you have school-based psychologists, and then you have much of the funding for mental health in the schools coming through the Health and Human Services Department through contract, through people like EveryMind, and we just gave them a little additional money to help so that money doesn't have to go to the school budget, which is based on maintenance of effort. And you have to, once you give the money, you can't retract from it according to state law. And so the whole budget of the Health and Human Services Department, just for context, is about $348 million. And so that's compared to you take the 288. And again, that's everything that HHS does: homelessness, preventing homelessness services. It's a huge range of services. And so to Councilmember Glass's point, those are decisions we have to make, and they can't be made in a vacuum.
Thank you. Would anybody like to add anything? Okay, we're going to move on. We're wrapping up in a little less than 15 minutes, so we'll try to get through a couple more questions, but we will not be able to answer everyone's. Someone wrote in, after an incident with my son at an elementary school, I was told that MOUs between law enforcement agencies and MCPS were ambiguous and would be examined. Has this been done?
If I could discuss that, we have had some conversations in the past with Chief Jones. We have a great opportunity now with the Board of Education resolution to really look at it and evaluate student-based arrest and disciplines. There's a work group that has been formed, and that's one of the things that we'll be looking at. along with Chief Jones and other stakeholders. I think any of those MOUs have to be reviewed in an ongoing fashion. We have to adapt to changes in our communities and make modifications as needed. So we look forward to working with the chief and other stakeholders and reviewing the MOU.
I'd just like to add on to that, that's a really important issue. We've talked about tonight that a lot of times the police officers, arrests that may take place are as a result of a request of a school administrator or teacher. I think Rebecca Tan, commented that it doesn't mean that there isn't bias present in that request. I don't know if this is the questioner and her experience, but I know Tiffany Kelly is commenting tonight, and she has a young son who ended up being interrogated by a police officer over play money, and the interrogation line was, I think, essentially about counterfeiting money, and the child's 9. There are so many breakdowns that resulted in that officer, questioning that 9-year-old. The bus driver, the teacher, the principal, every one of them failed to use common sense and say, this doesn't need to be escalated. This is just a child playing with a toy. And of course, the officer also could have taken a different approach. Every one of those adults failed that child. And, that happening is something we have to face up to. It is a reality. And that, of course, has a big effect on a kid or, on it's just part of this conversation. So, the question was really about the MCPS MOUs. I'm not that expert in that topic. But I do think it is critically important for MCPS to be constantly educating professionals and the educators and everybody within the MCPS world about what is, how and when to request police support. And if they handle that correctly, that makes for better community relations. Like that improves the confidence of students and their families in police and makes people feel less threatened, when they're not hearing stories like that. That's a good way to improve community relations. Thanks.
Sorry to jump in here, but I just have to hop off the call. I wanted to thank the organizers for having me, to all the panelists for the conversation. But thank you guys again.
Thank you so much for joining us. So we are going to have 2 more questions and then we'll end it for tonight. So please try to keep them short so we can hit these last 2.
Studies show Black and Latino students, as well as students with disabilities, are disproportionately arrested and disciplined by police in schools. Federal data from the 2015 to 2016 school year shows Black students represented 15% of total enrollment, but 31% of students arrested or referred to law enforcement. How can you ensure that SROs are not violating minority students' civil rights and disrupting their education or taking away from underprivileged students' education?
No, that's sort of the whole question. I don't think SROs intend to do that. I think the question really is about when you have police officers present where they may not necessarily be needed, you might end up with that outcome. There's other ways to handle conflict. There's other ways to handle problems. I think we're all trying to have a conversation about how to focus police where we really need police and not have police involved in situations where other types of professional work, will get the outcome that we want without some of the unintended consequences. So I just think this is a good example of a place where we don't really need police. And so we should not have police in this role, focus police where we need them, and then we would have less of those outcomes. I do want to say before we go, I don't know if there'll be a moment for closing statements or anything like that, but I really want to thank the department for their participation here. I mean, Chief Jones has spent a lot of time here tonight and his team because they want a chance for students to know who they are and what motivates them. And Officer McCloud, Officer McCloud is a wonderful officer. He's doing everything he can with heart. This is not a situation where we have bad people. Everyone is a professional here. I think we're all trying to look at bigger trends and numbers and bigger issues and try to all make a decision together about what the best way is to expend public resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments they want to add?
I would just say, following on what Councilmember Reimer says, I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to sort of pause and reflect. We can all do better in our own professions. But if we think about what is the goal here, the goal is to give all students in Montgomery County a great opportunity for education in a safe, supportive, and nurturing environment. So we all have that collective responsibility to roll up our sleeves and to do better.
Thank you. And this will be our last question tonight. It was directed at Officer McCloud, but if anyone wants to chime in after that, please feel free. Is there a disparity in the number of cases between the Down County and the rest of MCPS?
I don't know the answer to that question. Hopefully Sergeant Helton or the chief can answer that.
Chief, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, so what I would say is that we look at all of the schools and we look at the issues at our schools. There are certain schools that maybe we may have higher incidents of activity or events that are involving policing and SROs than other schools. But I can tell you up county, we have some issues with some schools versus some schools that we have down county that are on the same level. So again, how do we rectify? How do we come up with better solutions and, working with our school staff, the administrators and making better decisions? How do we look at that differently? I think what Mr. Clarke has raised is it's a good point, as well as Councilman Reimer. We have to look at all of our schools, but again, we have to look at the events. And this is, again, as we're talking about these things in sort of this big vacuum, we're really not getting down to really the true, what's behind the data. You could talk about data all day, but to me, it really comes about what's behind it. And we really need to really start highlighting that. And that's something we're going to be doing with MCPS in their evaluation of the SRO program that will also help us to look at what's the value in what's occurring and those outcomes and how is that being impacted even through the criminal justice system or through diversion through the state's attorney's office or juvenile system. We need to look at that to see what is the impact of that. So I am committed to doing that from a perspective that we really need to have that inner look at our program that says to us where we can make some better improvements. And it goes along with the reimagining of public safety here in Montgomery County.
And if I could just add, we agree with the chief. We need to look not only at the student arrest data, but our code of conduct violations, our disciplinary data across the system. When we see those disparities, we have to look at what are the root causes, what can we do differently to make sure that we have that equitable lens when we administer discipline within MCPS.
Thank you. And so go ahead.
Just very briefly, that point is so critical to reimagining public safety holistically. we had commissioned, and I had requested, and I think Councilmember Reimer requested as well, a look into police data. And the Office of Legislative Oversight came out with a report, I can't remember if it's this week or last week, but recently, that showed two things: that there is disparate data, that, you know, African Americans, Latinos are making up more of the arrests, traffic stops, and use of force incidents, not proportionate to their population, and that we are not tracking certain things, and in that behind the data we don't have a full understanding. We don't track race and ethnicity on, or keep everything electronically so that we can sort and track data. And the way you improve performance in any sort of endeavor is you track, and you value what you track. And I've argued that we need to also understand that picture, but also be tracking the positive interactions. And I think that was mentioned earlier. And that is the case in schools, if SROs are going to exist or not, but it's also the case in the larger public safety and policing context. And I think that data question is something that we need to be doing much better analysis on.
Thank you so much.
If I can just piggyback on real quick, what Councilmember Jawando said, and I completely agree. And this is a great opportunity to go over stats. And as we move forward, we have more opportunity to look at the positive outcomes that we track with the SROs, the times where the interventions and mentoring, the incidents where the SROs have prevented a tragedy at the school because they're already there, and it meant the police didn't have to respond to the school, or the incidents where they've helped the student out, the relationships they built. There's so many examples to where the student came to the SRO first, not the counselor, not the teacher or the principal, but the SRO, because of that relationship. And where the students graduated, and they still call the SRO for guidance because that relationship is so strong. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. So as we are creeping up on 8 o'clock, we're going to start to wrap up, but I do just want to open the floor to anyone for the last minute or so with any closing remarks. Great, thank you. So we will share the last slide with all of our information and be sending up a follow-up email. You can find us on social media as well. We have the department that presented tonight, as well as our overall organization social media. But if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at mcr-sga@gmail.com.
Great job. You guys did a great job. And thanks for everyone for participating.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a great evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Great job. Thank you, students. You're the best.